Good morning, everyone. This is Ben Weisner, your host for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning for Using Data to Keep Students Challenged with Read Naturally Live, presented by Claire Hayes. Claire has been involved with Read Naturally since its development. She consults with educators nationwide to discuss reading, fluency, and the Read Naturally strategy. Claire loves working with teachers to help them maximize the benefits of the various Read Naturally interventions. Please go ahead and ask any questions you may have using the questions tool in your meeting panel, and we'll make an effort to get back to as many of you as possible in the coming days with email responses to questions we may not be able to address today. You should have all received a link to the handouts for today's meeting. Claire will be referring to them during her presentation. The handouts are also available from the meeting panel if you'd like to download and print them out now. Many of you have also asked about a recording of this webinar. We'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours, so please look for them in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district who you think would benefit from this very valuable information. And finally, if you are having technical difficulties, please contact GoToWebinar support. Their phone number is listed at the bottom of the meeting panel. And now, without further delay, I'm going to pass the microphone off to Claire Hayes, your presenter for today's Read Naturally webinar.
Thank you, Ben, for that introduction, and thank you to all of you for being here today. This is a incredibly busy year, and the fact that so many of you have logged in today to learn about some things that might help your students really says a lot about you. So thank you for your dedication to your community and your students. And my hope today, as Ben said, I'm Claire Hayes. I've been working with Read Naturally for almost 20 years. And my plan today is to talk with you about keeping students challenged. So we're going to discuss student performance, monitoring that performance, and keeping them challenged throughout the school year. As Ben mentioned, there's two handouts. The first one is titled Keep Students Challenged Webinar Slides Handout. It's quite a long title, sorry about that. But that is just a copy of our slides. So if you are a person who likes to take notes, feel free to copy that off. That way you won't have to write down the information on the slides. Otherwise, you don't need it unless you are someone who wants to write notes on it. The other handout is a data handout, and that shows the data of the student problems that we're going to work through at the end of this webinar. So I will have that data available in my PowerPoint, but if you want to have it on your table as well, that is what that handout would be used for. So our whole session today is going to be focused on monitoring our students' performance as they work through Read Naturally Live. Ideally, we want our students to be challenged, right? We see the most success from students, the most growth from students, if we keep them as challenged as possible. However, we do not want them to get to the point of frustration. So I often think of it as like a clothesline, right? It has to be taught so that the clothes don't hit the ground, but it can't be so taught that it breaks. And so that is kind of how I envision keeping students challenged, is we want to keep that tension there to make sure that they are working hard, that they can reach their goals, but it takes a lot of effort to do so. And we don't want them to get to the point of frustration. When we deal with student performance, there's really two separate phases that we talk about. The first phase is checking the placement after about 3 stories. So that is what happens when your students have just completed the first couple stories in the level that you placed them in. So if you want information about that, I encourage you to go into our webinar link on our website, where there's a recording of a webinar I did about a month ago on checking initial placement. And again, that typically happens after students have completed about 3 stories. So it's real early on when you're trying to decide if this is the right level for the student. Okay, so that is the first phase. The rest of the time you will be spent keeping students challenged over time. Okay, and that's what we're going to primarily talk about today. You're checking placement. What you're really doing in that initial phase is deciding if their goal and level are right based on the data from the first few stories. So what you really do in that, with that initial webinar that I talked about a moment ago, deals with is looking at the data from the first few stories and pretending kind of like that's placement data to see, okay, if this was the placement data, would I still put them in this level? Okay. So again, that's the very first part of your time in working with Read Naturally Live. After that, so for the next 90% of your school year, what you're going to be doing is keeping students challenged. Okay. And we're looking at data typically then after they've completed 10, 11, 12, 13 stories is when you start taking a look at that. Our stories are broken up into 2 sections of 12, right? There's 24 nonfiction stories in each level, and they come in packs of 12. After students have completed 12, they will get the next set of 12. It's a natural reminder to you as a teacher to go and run the students at a glance report. Okay, that students at a glance report is what will help you decide whether or not they're in the right level and if they are ready for a change. Many students, almost all students, are ready for some sort of a change after 12 stories. Okay, then there's another set of 12 stories, and of course that is the case for first grade level all the way through 8th grade reading level. So long as your students are within that range, there are 24 stories in each level. This is what the Students at a Glance report looks like. I'm going to go in and show you where you can run it within Read Naturally Live, okay? So if we take a look at this information quickly, you'll notice that the student's grade, name, their homeroom teacher are listed first on the left-hand side. Then what's listed is the grade level that they're working in. So this student is in the sequence series of level 2.5. You had the date that the level started, how many stories they passed. Then you'll notice that the rest of the columns actually have 2 numbers in each section. The first number is the average of how students did in that area after the first 3 stories. The next number is how they did in that area after the most recent 3 stories. And I love to get averages because students have good days and bad days, and sometimes one data point is incredibly misleading, right? Whereas if you get an average, that gives you a much better picture of what the student is doing. So for a moment now, I'm going to just step out of my PowerPoint and I'm going to bring you to the Read Naturally Live login, or the Read Live login. Of course, you will log in by clicking on your staff button and then entering your username and password and clicking login. After you go to the home page, you will see a familiar set of tiles. As you probably are aware, there's bullets under each tile. Notice that the items in the bullets are the things that you can do within that tile. So the first thing I'm going to show you now is how to run that Students at a Glance report, and no surprise, it's under the Reports tile. The first couple reports have to do with administrative things. So the third one over is the Read Naturally Live reports, and that's where you will find your data from your students on how they've been doing in their Read Naturally Live account. The very first one is called the Students at a Glance report. So now you come in after clicking Students at a Glance, you select the student that you want to run the report on. You can select many students, you can select all your students, or you can select one student, however you want to do that. Then you click on Generate Report for selected. You select whatever date range you want and click Generate Report. Okay, so now you can see that this looks very similar to the one that I had on my PowerPoint, where we list the grade, name, level the students working in, how many stories they've passed, and all of their progression throughout those stories. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to come back into the PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to talk for a moment about what are the things that you're looking for. How do you make the decision? What areas of reading are you going to look at to make a decision on whether or not they are ready for more of a challenge? Okay, so there are things that you probably could intuit, right? You want to see, has their cold timing score improved? What about their hot timing score? Has that gone up? Is their comprehension stronger than it was at the beginning? Is their hot timing score close to their goal? You want their hot timing score to be within 10. Once they get to 10 or more away from their goal on their hot timing score, that means it's probably too big of a difference, okay? In the previous webinar I did about checking initial placement, I talk about a difference of 10 or more is a signal to you that the difference is too great, okay? The other thing you're looking at is whether or not their number of practices have decreased. So are they able to reach their goal after fewer practices than they were initially? And then of course, student behavior. Student behavior is, for those of you who are in distance learning, it may be significantly more challenging to identify trends and patterns in student behavior. But of course, some indications that students need more of a challenge are going to be boredom, sloppy work if their work was more accurate previously. You're also looking at how they are doing as far as, are they meeting all their requirements their first time through? How many stories are they completing in a week, and how well they're getting through those things. So those are some of the things that you still can identify even if you are in a distance learning environment. When we make a change, when we decide to increase a challenge, we only increase one element at a time. So that means that we will either raise a level or raise a goal. There are very rare occurrences where we do make a change to both, but it is highly unusual. So you should assume that you are going to make a change to one or the other. Now, after students have completed 12 stories in a level, there is another set of 12 available to them at that level. So because of that fact, we tend to raise the goal after 12 stories because there are more stories available. After 24 stories, we have to raise the level, right? There's only 24 stories available in each of the levels. So after 24, we have to raise the level. The other thing we want to consider is their long-term fluency benchmark goal. Okay, and so we always want to keep that in mind when we're working with our students. Where do we ultimately want this student to be? Okay, so the long-term fluency benchmark goal means that we want the student to be able to read unpracticed grade level passages at or near the 50th percentile on national norms. Okay, so that means goals and hot timings are not what we're looking at for deciding whether or not they are ready, or for deciding what their long-term benchmark goals are. Okay, we are looking at unpracticed. Okay, so ideally we're looking at assessment data from a Ames Web, Dibbles, or something similar to that. We can also look a little bit in the data within the program, but then we're only really considering cold scores because it needs to be unpracticed. Okay, here are our oral reading fluency norms at the 50th percentile for grades 1 through 6. Now, our program does go through 8th grade reading level, but in middle school, the numbers tend to kind of flatten out. They are very similar as students go through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So in the fall, we use those fall 50th percentile norms to decide who this program is appropriate for. Okay, so students who are below the 50th percentile in unpracticed grade level material are good candidates for using this program. In the spring, we're looking at these numbers to decide when they are ready to exit and to remind ourselves where we want them to be. Okay, so regardless of where they are now, we know where we want them to be. We want them to be at or above the 50th percentile on grade level material the first time they read it. Okay, so it's always important to keep that in mind as you're working with your students. Sometimes when we have struggling readers, we do get so excited about the progress they make that we forget that their peers are making progress. So our students need to make more progress than their peers in order to reach that point. And so that's what the system in this program is designed to do. So now we're going to take a look at the first student. Lee is going to be the first student we're going to walk through. I'm going to show you his data, and we're going to ask ourselves these questions. We're going to ask ourselves whether or not his cold and hot scores have improved. We're going to ask ourselves, how close is his hot timing score to his goal? Is it 10 or more away? We're going to look at his comprehension quiz scores and see if that's getting better. We also want to know how many times he's practicing. Is he able to reach his goal after fewer practices than he was before? So here's the data for Lee. Lee's a 3rd grade student. He's working in level 2.5 and he's passed 12 stories. Okay, so let's ask ourselves those questions. The first one is whether or not his cold timing score has improved. So we can find that cold timing column right here, and we can see that after the first 3 stories, he read 41 words correct on average after the first 3, and the most recent 3, he was up to 48 words correct per minute. So Lee has made progress on his cold timing scores. What about his hot timing scores? Right over here. He was at 74 and now he's at 80 on average. So he's making progress there too. How about his goal? Is his average hot timing score, so we're looking at this, the most recent average hot timing score, Is it 10 or more above his goal? Yes, it's exactly 10 more above his goal. So that tells us that that is a difference that is a little more than we want it to be. So we want to likely increase the challenge based off of that. What about his quiz? Lee started fairly strong, right? When students are introduced to a new program, oftentimes their comprehension lags at first as they become familiar with all the different components. But Lee started off real strong already at 87, and he still went up. So his quiz has improved. And his number of practices has gone from 6 on average to 5 on average. So Lee is like the poster child for progress, right? He's made progress in every area. And so it's not hard to answer the question on whether or not he needs more of a challenge. Yes, not only has he done it in more than 2 areas, but he's done it in every single area. So Lee is definitely ready for more of a challenge. So now that we know we need to make a change for Lee. Now we have to decide, well, what do we do? Do we raise his level or do we raise his goal? Okay, so we're going to ask ourselves the questions about how many stories he's passed and what's his long-term fluency goal and where is he at as far as meeting that goal from a rate standpoint or from a level standpoint. Okay, so we'll ask those 3 questions one at a time. The first question is, has Lee completed 12 or 24 stories? Lee has only completed 12 stories. So remember from that previous slide I showed you, we tend to increase goal after 12. Okay, so that is where we're based off this. That's what we're kind of thinking at this point. Now we ask ourselves, what's Lee's long-term benchmark fluency goal? Okay, so ultimately by the end of this school year, we want him at 112 words correct per minute when reading grade level material. And ideally, we would find that number out by giving him a formal assessment, okay? So right now, his cold timing is at 48, and we want him to be at 112 on grade level. Is he closer to meeting long-term benchmark rate or level? So from a rate standpoint, he's at 48 words correct per minute right now. And he's reading, we want him to be at 112. Now, remember, this is not in a formal assessment, and it's not exactly grade level, is it? Because he's at 2.5. But still, this gives us some idea as far as how many words he's able to read in a minute compared to where we want him to be. So he's quite a ways away from that. From a level standpoint, he's a 3rd grader, and he's reading level 2.5. So that is not a very big difference. Okay, so he is closer to his level. The level that we have him working at is fairly close to his actual grade level. So because of this information, what would we do? Would we raise his level or would we raise his goal? In Lee's case, we would raise his goal. Okay. Now that we know we want to raise his goal, we have to decide how much by, right? We tend to raise goals by 10 words at a time, okay? If we were to have decided to raise his level, we tend to raise levels by half a grade level at a time. So if he's in 2.5, we would go up to 3.0. There are situations where you may raise him by a full grade level. It's rare, and it tends to be in situations where there's a huge disparity between the age or the grade of the student and the level that they're working at. The other thing we want to do is discuss the change with I've had some people ask about whether or not they have conferences with the students. Absolutely. I know that it's hard to do that, especially right now. But they need to be in on the decision. You need their buy-in now more than ever. And as we all know as educators, if you can hook the kid, if you can get the kids buy-in, your job is half over. And so discussing the change, especially when the change is a positive one, is tremendously beneficial for your students. So you're going to need to have conversations with them when the change is not a positive one. But you also definitely want to discuss the good ones with them. For one, it's a moment to celebrate. For two, if they know that you are interested in what they think, they understand that more so that this is their job, that they are responsible for their own progress in their own reading. And so incorporating their opinion and having a short discussion with them is incredibly important. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute conversation, right? It's amazing how just a few moments of dedicated conversation time with your student, what a long way that can go. So his goal was 70 words correct per minute. Remember the previous slide said we raise goals by 10 at a time. So his new goal is going to be 80. Okay. And you're going to make that change within Read Naturally Live. Now, you can make that change from the student module, and you can also make that change from the teacher module. Okay, so I'm going to show you where you can make that change within the program. When you're logged into the staff module, you're going to go underneath the Read Naturally Live tile when you want to make an adjustment to their level and goal. Again, notice the bullet points underneath. The second one down lists adjust, levels, and goals. So we're going to click on the Read Naturally Live tile. Then I'm going to find the name of the student who I want to make the adjustment to and scroll over to the right. Please notice this toolbar at the bottom. And if I scroll over to the right, then my edit button becomes available. Clicking on the edit button will bring up a screen that will allow me to adjust the series level and goal. So with Lee, I would raise his goal by 10 and then click save and close. Make sure you click save and close in order for that to happen. You can also change their series level and goal from the student module while the student is working. And you do that by clicking on that button that is available in the student module that has the apple and says teacher. When you click on that button and you enter your teacher information, you can adjust the level and goal from there as well. So if you realize this change needs to be made when you are with the student in the student module, you can do it from that point, or you can do it from the staff module. Both options work. So now that we know we're raising Lee's goal to 80 and we've showed you how to do it, I want to talk to you for a moment about whether or not Lee would be ready to exit. Now, I know likely in October, we're not quite thinking about whether or not these students are ready to exit, but you will be. And so I want you to understand, as I mentioned before, that ideally you're going to look at benchmark assessment data. Okay, you will know that he entered the program because he was below the 50th percentile in the fall. He read 36 words correct per minute, and that was below for a third grader. In the spring, now he is at 85 words correct per minute. So we gave him his fall, winter, and now spring benchmark assessment, and he read 85 words correct per minute. The Read Naturally data we have for Lee is important, and it is even more valuable than it might be for other students because he is a third grader reading at level 3.5 and Read Naturally Live, okay? So that means that this data is slightly more valuable to us than if it was a student who is reading at a very different level. His average cold timing score at this point is 85 words correct per minute. We want him to be at 112. Okay, remember, we want that spring assessment information is the most valuable data point. And we want that to be at 112. So clearly he is not ready to exit, okay, based off of the Read Naturally data or the fall assessment. Sometimes people get confused and try to look at their hot timing. The hot timing number does not tell us anything about whether or not he needs the program or about whether or not he's ready to exit, okay? The hot timing data is not what we're looking at. We want unpracticed grade level material, okay, which means that is not the hot timing, okay? Now, we have a student working in 3.5 as a third grader, and we've identified that they are not ready to move. They're not ready to leave the intervention. It is very common for you to have students working above their grade level and still need this intervention. And that's because when we placed them initially, and when we checked their initial placement, we put them in a level that was challenging. They get audio support. They practice over and over again with a narrator. They read along. They practice over and over again independently. So all of this support allows them to work at a level that's higher. So even if you have a third grader working in 4.0, that doesn't mean he's ready to exit. The information you're looking at to decide if he's ready to exit is this assessment data, okay? If you are, for some reason, are unable to get that formal assessment data, then their cold timing is a valuable piece of information, although, again, not as good as the formal assessment data, of course. So based on this information, we know that Lee is not ready to exit Read Naturally, okay? Now, Lee was a lovely little example because he did beautifully in every area. And I get calls about students and their data, and very rarely are they students like Lee, right? We all know what to do for a student who is progressing well, but the trouble comes in when we have students who are not making the adequate progress that we want them to be making. And so there are some things that we need to think about when we see that. So if we run the students at a glance report and we see the student is not making progress, or they're making just tiny amounts of progress, or heaven forbid, they're decreasing in areas, we need to figure out why. And the first thing that I talk to about with teachers when I talk with them about this is whether or not students are doing the steps correctly. Okay, are they completing the steps the way that they are intended to be completed? Again, if you're in a distance environment, this is significantly harder to check. It's definitely harder to enforce, but there are ways to do it. So for example, one of the most common things that we see done incorrectly is the read along. Students put on headphones, they listen to a narrator, and they think they can just stare off into space and not read along. The way that manifests itself, so if you're in a distance learning environment and you can't see that the kid is looking out the window, well, the read along step is on, like you could when he was in the classroom with you. The way that you will notice it is he's going to have a lot of errors on his past timing, right? He's probably going to do very poorly on his comprehension. Okay, he may not be able to reach his goal the first time he does his past timing with you. Okay, so those things are indicators to you that he's not doing his step properly. I always like to use the number of required read-alongs as a way to encourage my students to do the step properly. So you can say to students, look, as soon as I can see that you're doing the read along properly, then I can bring you down to 2 read alongs. I can adjust that for you. I could even maybe bring you down to 1 read along if you're really doing well with accuracy and comprehension. So, and on the flip side, if I see that you're very inaccurate on your past timing and your comprehension is poor, or you're not able to reach your goal, then I might increase the number of read alongs. Okay, so that that compromise or that negotiation that you have with your students is very critical to getting them to do that step properly. The other thing you can do is make an adjustment. If a student is feeling frustrated or bored, maybe reducing the number of read-alongs is a good thing to do. Another good common adjustment would be having them do whole story timings instead of just 1 minute timings. And that all of these adjustments can be made under changing story options within the staff module, as well as logging in to the staff module through the students module. But the program adjustments that are common might be, again, altering how many required read-alongs, making them do whole story timings instead of just 1 minute timings, altering how many required practices they have. Maybe if you have a student who's very far below grade level, you want them in the act of reading more, you might turn off the retell step because you don't feel you have the time to dedicate to writing. So those are some of the common things that you may make changes to. You also might have students who are struggling with comprehension. You may provide supplementary instruction to them. On our website, we have something called a teacher's guide to teaching comprehension. And it's a great little tool. It has little lesson plans for all the different kinds of comprehension questions that appear in the Read Naturally stories. And there's little ideas for how to teach those kinds of questions. So that's a great way to expand on your instruction, is to identify which kinds of questions are causing problems for your students and then have little lessons about those. Another way to encourage comprehension growth is by having them click on all the keywords. If you notice, before they do the read along step, a number of keywords are bolded. Not bolded, they're blue. And that means they're hyperlinked, okay? So if there's a blue word, the students can click on it and read their definition. So oftentimes students who struggle with comprehension due to vocabulary, I will have them click on all those keywords and read their definitions before they do their read along step. Okay, so those are some different supplementary instruction as well as program adjustments that you can do with the student. Finally, adjusting their level and goal. Sometimes it's too hard, but oftentimes it's not hard enough. I think that's probably the most common thing that I see with students, or when I talk with teachers about their students, is that their level isn't quite hard enough. Because of all the support the program provides, they really can handle more than they normally could. And Altering their level and goal, raising their level and goal is often exactly the spark a student needs to start making more progress. And so sometimes, even if they're not making progress, you might still raise a level and goal in order to spark some heightened level of interest and engagement within the program. So now we're going to take a look at 3 other students, Jeff, John, and Janelle. And that is the handout that I talked to you about that is available. The initial, the beginning of the title is data handout. So if you want to open that, I will also have the data on the PowerPoint. So it is not necessary, but it is available if you want it. So let's take a look at Jeff. Now, with the next 3 students, we're going to get a little bit more information that you probably would know if you were the student's teacher. So for example, we note down here that this student self-times for cold timing. We also know that Jeff has a real positive attitude and he tends to work very well, okay? Jeff is a 3rd grade student. So we're gonna ask ourselves those questions we asked when we went through the problem with Lee, and we'll do it one at a time with our data visible. So again, Jeff is a 3rd grade student. He's working in level 3.0 and he has passed 12 stories. This is the most common time that you will do the first check for progress monitoring, okay, is after they complete 12 stories. The first thing we're going to ask ourselves is, has his cold timing score improved? For Jeff, that has not. It has stayed the same after 12 stories. What about his hot timing score? Has that improved? It has a little bit. He's gone up by about 4 from 93 to 97. What about his hot timing score in relation to his goal? Is there less than a 10 words correct per minute difference? Yes. His goal is 90 and he's reading at 97. So he is under that 10 threshold. Has his quiz improved? Yes, his quiz has improved. In fact, it started out where I was a little concerned because he was down at 67. And that is fairly common when students start a new program, is there's a big learning curve. And so sometimes their quiz scores are slightly lower than they end up being. And so this is a good thing to see that bumped up right above 80%. What about his number of practices? Has that decreased? Yes, in fact, it went from 6 to 3. And think about that for a moment. Think about the relationship that has with the hot timing score. So remember, he only made a 4-word gain in his hot timing score, except he was able to make that gain after only 3 practices instead of 6 practices. So that actually is quite a bit, it is a significantly bigger gain when you take that into account, okay? So now we ask ourselves, does Jeff need more of a challenge? Okay, so he's made progress in his hot timing and his practice and his quiz. So yes, he is ready for more of a challenge. Okay, so now we're going to ask ourselves, what do? We know he's ready for more of a challenge. We ask ourselves these 3 questions again. The first one is, how many stories has he completed? In Jeff's case, he's completed 12, which after 12 stories, we're slightly more inclined to raise a goal, right? Because they still have 12 more stories in that level. So we are slightly more inclined to raise a goal. But before we can make a firm decision, we need to take a look at Jeff's long-term benchmark fluency goal. Okay, so by the spring of the year, we want him reading 112 words correct per minute on grade level material unpracticed. Okay. So is he closer to meeting his long-term benchmark in rate or in level? All right, so let's take a look at that. When we look at his rate, he is at 61 words correct per minute on unpracticed material. We want him to be at 112. So he's got a huge way to go there. He is reading at 3.0 and he's a 3rd grader. So the difficulty of his level, the content of his level is very close to the level that he's actually, the grade level he's actually in. So he's much closer in level. So what would we do? Would we raise his goal or level? He has a lot further to go when it comes to rate, and that is tied directly to the goal. So we are going to raise Jeff's goal. How much do we raise Jeff's goal by? We raise it by 10. So if his previous goal was 90, his new goal is going to be 100. Okay, so we're going to go in to the Read Live program. We're going to edit his series level and goal and increase it by his goal by 10. Okay. Now let's take this same data from the same student, but let's say that instead of a 3rd grader, Jeff is an 8th grader. Okay. Does that change what we would do and how? Okay, so as an 8th grader, Jeff is in level 3.0 with a goal of 90. Let's ask ourselves the same questions we asked when he was only a 3rd grader, but now think of him as an 8th grader. So he's completed 12 stories. That's still the case, right? Now let's look at his long-term benchmark goal and his fluency goal. We ultimately want him reading 146 words correct per minute when he's reading 8th grade material unpracticed. He's only at 61 in 3rd grade level material. So is he closer to meeting his long-term goal in rate or fluency? Well, he's reading 61. We need him at 146. He's an 8th grader and he's reading at 3rd grade level material. So the truth is, he is having trouble with both. Both need to increase significantly. So it is not necessarily clear there, except that when you have a student who is reading that far below grade level, you really need to get them exposure to higher level concepts, more challenging vocabulary word, more challenging comprehension questions. And so that need to get them exposed to higher level content is going to trump it, because basically he's very far below in both. But our need to raise his level is so great that we're going to go ahead and raise his level, even though he's only completed 12 stories. Okay, he's making progress, he's doing well. We think he can handle a higher level, so we're going to raise him to 3.5. Okay. So now let's go on to John. Note about John down here. John often makes too many errors to pass on the first attempt. Almost all of you will have a student where this is the case. Okay. And you have to hold their feet to the fire. I had questions before this webinar about what do you do if you need to make students redo stories? Don't make them redo stories, but don't pass them until they've met all the requirements, right? They have to make him go back and read along again if he's making too many errors. Make him practice again. And that's what that remedial action screen is for you to take him back to do that. So based on this information that we know about John, let's look at his data and let's ask ourselves those questions one at a time. So John is a 6th grader working in level 5.0 and he's read 12 stories. Has his average cold timing score improved? It has, a little bit, but not much. Has his hot timing score improved? It has a little bit, but not much. Is his goal 10 words below his hot timing? No, it's only 4, so they're close enough still. And what about his quiz? Yes, his quiz has gone up, but again, just a very small amount. So he is making progress, but not that much. After 12 stories, we would expect more progress than this. His number of practices has remained the same, so he's still having to practice the same number of times. Okay. So does John need more of a challenge? Now, because John, remember, he makes a lot of errors when he gets to his past timing. And so we are not going to give him more of a challenge. If he is rushing and making lots of errors, he is not ready for more of a challenge, okay? So that piece of information about the student that only the teacher knows, this is where I think the art of teaching comes in, right? The data is muddled. He's making tiny bits of progress, but the most important piece of information there is that the teacher knows that the student's making lots of errors after he's read along over and over again. And after he's practiced over and over again, he still is making a lot of errors. And so we are not going to give him more of a challenge. In fact, we're going to provide guidance, again, with that little conference, right? We're going to talk to the student. Now, this isn't as fun of a conference when you get to tell them that you're going to raise a level or goal, but it certainly is just as important. All kids want a higher level and they all want a higher goal. Even if they act like they don't, they do. It is just human nature. They don't want you to tell them that they can't go up. And so telling him why he can't go up is your best bet at getting him to fix it. He can't go up because he's too inaccurate. There's no reason for him to be inaccurate after practicing, after reading along, after going through all the steps. And so until he can prove to you that he is accurate, you cannot alter his level or goal, okay? And so that conversation needs to happen. Now let's look at his data with a little bit twist to it. So let's say his quiz scores, although still a tiny bit of progress, are still quite low. Now, if you watch the webinar on checking initial placement, you will remember I said that at first we will tolerate quiz scores at 60%. We don't want them to stay there. And this is where it applies. So we will tolerate it after the first 3 stories because there's a learning curve to learning a new program. And so we will allow it to be at 60% without lowering them. However, if it remains in the 60s, we need to then lower them after 12 stories. Okay, so if this student, his quiz scores are still down in the 60s, then we are actually going to lower him down to 4.5, and we would leave his goal the same, because remember, we only change one thing at a time. Okay. Again, likely the errors and the low quiz scores likely fixed by actually doing the read along properly. Okay, and so explaining that to the student is often quite helpful in getting them to actually do it. Our final student today is Janelle, and she is a 4th grade student. She is showing signs of boredom, which of course is something that you do not want to happen when your main objective is to keep a student challenged. Students who are challenged are not bored. And so you want these students to not be bored. You want them to be engaged. And in order for them to be engaged, they need to be in a level that is challenging and stimulating for them. So let's take a look at Janelle's data. And keep in mind that she's bored. She's doing very well. We've already raised her goal one time. That's huge. We already knew she needed a change after only fewer than 12 stories. Okay, so as Janelle is a 4th grader and she's working in level 2.5 and she's passed 12 stories. So our first question is, has her cold timing score improved? It has dramatically. And you will see these students, and it is just so much fun when you do, because this is just tremendous gains to see right off the bat. Her hot timing score has also improved tremendously. Her goal is 10 words lower than her average hot timing score, okay? And we've already raised her goal one time, okay? So this is a kid who is just sailing, and you want to help encourage that acceleration by keeping her as challenged as possible. What about her quiz? Her quiz started out solid and is now phenomenal. Okay, so she's made progress there, and her practices have gone down. So Janelle is just clipping right along. She's doing beautifully. So we clearly know that Janelle needs more of a challenge. So now we're going to ask ourselves, what do we do? Do we raise her level or her goal? Okay, we're going to ask ourselves these questions that we did before, one at a time. Remember, we've already raised her goal one time, and she's bored. Bored indicates to me that the content is not interesting. Okay, so keep that in mind. Janelle has completed 12 stories, which we are usually more inclined then to raise goal. Her long-term benchmark on rate is significantly different. We want her at 133, and she's only at 67. And her level, she's a 4th grader reading 2.5. And so that isn't terribly different, although that is significant still. So the question is whether or not we raise her level or we raise her goal. Now, because she's telling me she's bored, that makes me think of level. That makes me think of content and vocabulary not being engaging enough. And because we already raised her goal one time, we are going to decide to raise Janelle's level. Okay, with a student who just starts to soar, you got to let them go as quickly as you can. So bring this student up from 2.5 to 3.0. She's ready. Okay, she's really, really making progress. And her comprehension is so solid that there's no doubt in your mind that she can handle more challenging material. Okay. So I hope that overview was helpful. I have some resources available to you here. I mentioned a couple other webinars that I have done previously for you that are available on our website. You can find them in these links. And so please look at these resources, utilize these resources, as well as please reach out to us. Our customer service and tech support are phenomenal. So please feel free to reach out to them. If you want someone to walk you through analyzing your data the first time, let me know. I am more than happy. You can send me your report or you can call me with the data and we can talk over the phone. Please feel free to email me to set something up to do that. I'm more than happy to walk you all through that. So again, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your dedication to teachers. And please do let us know when your questions and concerns appear. We're happy to help. Take care.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks to everyone for attending our webinar. Another reminder that we'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours. So please look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district. Also, if you could, please respond to the survey that will appear on your screen as you exit the webinar. so we can continue to improve this educational experience for all of you in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.